And welcome into a new episode of the Zero Technique Football Podcast. I am your co-host, Ryan Stern. Joined with me this week is Jared Zero. Jared, it's good to have you back on.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Sorry to all my adoring fans that missed me last week. I got to see my aunt, which is nice. I don't get to see her super often, so I had some family stuff going on. But yeah, I mean, I've been good. How's things on your end?
Things are good. The one thing that now we're getting into to the real meat of sports season. We got baseball is in full swing, and so is the coronavirus down in Miami. Which, is it any surprise that if there was going to be a team that had a coronavirus outbreak, it was going to be a team from Florida, and B, the Marlins? Because the Marlins have been pretty much the walking coronavirus for the past 15 years.
Yeah, no, I gotta give you props on that unintentional dad joke. Baseball's in full swing.
Yeah. I didn't even realize. All right. Yes, I'm so good at dad jokes. They just come out. They come out like nothing. But yeah. So we've got baseball, and I've got hockey for me, who's as wild about hockey as I am football, maybe even a little more. We're recording this tonight for those of you listening not live. We are recording at around 7:30 on Wednesday night. My New York Rangers play the New York Islanders in about a half hour, so looking forward to that. It's been exactly 20 weeks since the last Rangers game, so definitely looking forward to that. And the playoffs get underway on Saturday. And now we got football, and all the news is coming out, especially over the past 2 days. It's official. The CBA has been approved by the Players Union, and now we're seeing players either added to the COVID-19 reserve list or opting out of this season. And that's going to be the major talking point over the next couple of weeks until we start to see some real action on the field.
Yeah, it's exciting because, like you were saying, hockey's back, baseball's back, basketball is back, and obviously I want football to be back, but given players starting to opt out almost left and right, and having other players come up with positive tests already, I'm worried that we might not actually get a season.
Yeah, it's really looking tough. It's only been a day or so since we've started to see these players get added to these lists, and the Patriots, your Patriots, have already had 6 players opt out for the season. The Giants had Nate Solder opt out for reasons. He's a cancer battler himself. His son is going through an ongoing battle with cancer. You got in Philadelphia, Marquise Goodwin, the wide receiver they just traded for during the draft. He opted out. Him and his wife are they either just had or they're expecting a child, and they've had issues with. I know in 2017, Marquise Goodwin and his wife had a miscarriage or stillborn pregnancy, and he had scored a touchdown right after, and he took the ball into the end zone and held it like a baby, and it was a real touching moment there. But so he's opted out. When you're looking at some of the names of the players that are opting out, I guess, are there any big names that really stand out to you?
In terms of big names, I guess The biggest ones to me, honestly, they do come from the Patriots. You kind of hit the nail on the head with Nate Solder being a cancer survivor, Marquise Goodwin, wanting to protect his child, and even Dante Hightower. He opted out for the Patriots, and he just had a baby. But some of the players like Marcus Cannon, that's a huge, huge blow to the Patriots' offensive line, and then Patrick Chung, of course. I think those are some of the bigger name players that it doesn't necessarily shock me that they're opting out, but it's still kind of concerning. Obviously, we have players who aren't necessarily directly affected by it, who are opting out just for their own safety, which is completely understandable at this point. But in terms of really a player opting out that surprised me, or bigger named player, not yet, I guess is the term.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess right now, especially in the fantasy world, the biggest name has to be Damian Williams. And for any of you who were watching or tuning into last week's episode, Clark and I had studs, duds, and sleepers. And one of my duds was Clyde Edwards-Helaire because I thought he was going way too high in drafts, and because I thought that Damian Williams was still going to be an integral part of the Kansas City Chiefs offense. Well, now he's opted out. And for as much as I was steering away from rookies, this may be an opportunity for a rookie to really step up. And if there's going to be a non-quarterback winning rookie of the year this year, I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire has as great a chance as any.
Yeah, it's definitely hard from the fantasy perspective, especially at this current moment where nobody knows what's going to happen even the day before, week 1 starts. So having Damian Williams opt out from like you said, from his fantasy perspective is kind of a big hit, but at least you get that news now, right?
Right.
What happens, week 3 or week 4, where let's say someone like a DeAndre Hopkins, God forbid they get sick, or a lot of other players are starting to test positive. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw players opt out earlier in the season as well, right? They start playing, they're going for week 1, week 2, maybe week 3, you start to see a spike in cases. And then you have players opt out as they say, you know what, I tried it, I gave it a shot, but it's just too much of a health risk.
Yeah, no, the players do have a 10, I believe it's a 10-day window to opt out and be in the running for a stipend for the year. I believe it's either $350,000 or $375,000 for the year. Those players who are considered high risk, if they have opted out and they are deemed high risk, they won't have to pay it back. If they're opting out just for personal reasons, it'll get deducted from future paychecks. So I don't know what the circumstances are going to be if somebody opts out outside of that window. I haven't looked into that as deeply. That's something that we will definitely be able to report or to talk about next week. But yeah, that's going to be, and it's going to happen.
Right.
You know that you're going to find some players who are just going to be like, listen, for the guys on my team just tested positive. I don't really have any major health risks, but I just don't want to take the chance of infecting anybody else at my home. I'm going to take the rest of the year off. It's going to happen, especially in a sport like football where you're face to face just far more than any other sport that's opening up.
Now, you mentioned high risk, right? And so if players are high risk or considered high risk, and they opt out, they don't have to pay back the stipend. But if they, opt out for personal reasons, do we know what is considered high risk and what is considered a personal reason? Because similar to like we mentioned earlier with Marquise Goodwin opting out because he has a child, Dante Hightower, while I guess those would be considered personal, I feel like those should fall under high risk. You have a newborn child at home.
Yes, I think there is a list of reasons to opt out that a player would have to prove. Obviously, I think the having a pregnant wife or a pregnant girlfriend or a newborn is on the list. So if that's the reason, then obviously there isn't a whole lot you need to prove. You just need to say, look, here's my kid.
Right.
And they'll be granted it. Certain health conditions. And so this brings me to it's a great segue, something that we were talking about just before we went on air, and that's James Conner, the running back from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Here's a guy who had a very open battle with cancer when he was in college at Pitt. He battled, he came back, was a third-round draft pick by his hometown Steelers. He's come out and said that he's going to play. Again, minds can change, things can change. Just a couple hours before the news about Nate Solder opting out, the reports were that he was going to report to camp. So I don't know if they just thought he was going to, if he was reporting to camp, they got the news and was going to stay, or if maybe he just reported to camp to let everybody know that he was going to opt out from the season. But this was a report that these reports were coming out literally hours before he said no. So obviously something happened where something had to have changed. James Conner, though, when I can see where he's coming from, where if he thinks that he doesn't have as much of a risk of further debilitation if he were to contract it. But James Conner's in a very difficult place in terms of his NFL career right now. He's had a bunch of injuries, has not been able to stay on the field for long periods of time, aside from that first stretch, I guess the year that Le'Veon Bell sat out in 2018. But then he just hasn't been able to stay on the field consistently. And now especially with a big time running back class in next year's draft, it's going to be tough for James Conner to get another contract, and especially a big time contract at that. So I think that may weigh into his decision to play and to maybe try and earn that contract for next year.
I agree with that 100%, and that's actually what I was just about to say. I think that this year is super vital for James Conner in terms of, like you said, his contract, the money he brings in. Obviously, in 2018, he had that huge season. Everyone's, who's this kid? We don't know who he is, and he's making a name for himself in 1 year. 2019 season rolls around, and while I thought he was still a pretty solid running back, he did have his issues with injury. So this, I think, is the year that he's saying, look, I gotta prove myself. I gotta prove it to my teammates. I gotta prove it to everybody in the league that I can be a top running back. I can be the James Conner from 2018. And I don't think he's going to let anything stop him. I mean, for somebody who's been through open heart surgery, he beat Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's really nothing James Conner can't do, right? And he has the spirit and that drive of a warrior, and he wants to show that. He wants to prove it. So, as somebody who I guess in normal terms would be classified as high risk if he was to test positive for corona, I think that he wants to just prove to all the doubters and to everyone, say, look, I am a fighter. I beat the odds in college. I can beat the odds again, and I can be a top running back.
And then we also look at there's this other list. There's the opt-out list, and then there's this COVID-19 reserve list, where it doesn't necessarily mean that a player has tested positive for COVID-19. It could mean that, or they've come in contact with someone who has tested positive. And there were a couple really big names that were on that list today. You have Lane Johnson in Philly. In Detroit, you had Kenny Galladay and TJ Hawkinson. Those are just some of the big names that we've seen. Vic Beasley. Have you seen what's going on in Tennessee with Vic Beasley? He's been a no-show. They just haven't been able to get in contact with him. They don't know where he is. He hasn't shown up for testing. And in a time where the new CBA allows a team to fine somebody $50,000 a day that they don't show up, the fact that he is a no-call, no-show is awfully worrisome for the big-time pass rusher down there in Tennessee.
Yeah, that is definitely out of the ordinary. However, I feel like obviously it's hard to pass judgment on something like that given the circumstances, right? It's like you said, it's worrisome, it's concerning, but who knows what could have happened, right? He could be dealing with something that's going on in his family, right? He could actually just be very sick from COVID, knock on wood, but and can't make it to the phone or call or whatever, or he doesn't, you know what I mean? So there's so many different factors right now that I feel like under normal circumstances wouldn't necessarily happen or contribute to being a no-call, no-show, because it's not very often you hear players as a no-call, no-show.
Right.
But one of the bigger names on that list to me was the rookie running back for the Buccaneers, Keyshawn Vaughn.
Yep.
That was kind of, I guess, a surprise for me, because he, from everything I've read about him to everything I've seen, he supposedly is going to work seamlessly into that Buccaneers offense with Tom Brady. And so it makes me wonder just how much their offensive game plan is going to have to look without him. So I feel like that's a bigger hit than people are expecting it to be.
Yeah, so again, we don't know a whole lot with this list. This list could just, again, like I said, it could just mean that he came in contact with somebody and now he has to test a couple times before then he can show up and do his testing with the team. That could also be where he's at the end of the 2-week quarantine. So there's just so much unknown when it comes to these lists right now that you can't really make a statement whether or not it's going to hurt somebody in terms of their playing time. Now, granted, there's been a whole lot of rumblings that Ronald Jones has come into camp in great shape. He is looking to really make a name for himself. He just has not looked really good over the first 2 years of his career. He came on a little bit towards the end of last year, but for the first year and a half of his NFL career, you could have really considered Ronald Jones to be a bust. And I think that was one of the reasons why a lot of people were excited about Keyshawn Vaughn, especially because Keyshawn Vaughn, the one thing that he's already better at than Ronald Jones is blitz pickup. Ronald Jones just is one of the worst blocking running backs in the NFL right now. He's just allergic to it. And Keyshawn Vaughn at Vanderbilt was really good, was able to show good technique. And I think one of the reasons why Tom Brady would like to have had Keyshawn Vaughn there with him is because of that. So it's going to be real interesting to see whether or not Ronald Jones can come into camp and really show the doubters that they're wrong about him and that he can have an impact.
I think partially the reason why Ronald Jones had such a rough start to his career is it's about leadership, right? Obviously, if you don't have great leadership in the locker room, you're not going to have that type of discipline on the field. And I think that's going to speak volumes with a guy like Brady and Gronkowski in the locker room. So it'd be cool to see if Ronald Jones goes in and he works with these veteran players, because I'm sure Brady can give him tips, right? He's done it with New England, and it doesn't matter what. I don't want to say it doesn't matter what position, because if Brady sees something, right, he can tell him, look, I can read offenses. So if you see this type of formation or whatever, you can expect, this guy to blitz, and you just got to pick up that block or whatever, right? And having that sort of veteran presence in a locker room can change a whole person's season. And we see it all the time when, vets go into a locker room and with a bunch of young guys, and those young guys come fired up and they're given 120% instead of 110% that they give on any other given night. So there's a lot of factors to it. It'd be cool to see him bounce back and, prove the doubters, prove the haters wrong. But I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. So I think one thing, and I'm going to throw in a little bit of a fantasy spin to everything. I've never been one that has really gone after backups for the guys that I draft. The term is called a handcuff. So I know one of the more intriguing ones last year was Tony Pollard, who was the backup to Ezekiel Elliott. The guys that you tended to try and handcuff were the ones that were going to be in the best situation should an injury happen. So the Cowboys, obviously, they've got a great offensive line. A running back that comes in and runs behind that offensive line is going to have pretty decent success. And Tony Pollard looked pretty good at times last year. So that was one of the reasons why he was high on a lot of people's boards. But a lot of handcuffing was not really looked upon as something that was important to do. This year, I think it's going to be extremely important, because you don't know when something, even outside of an injury, and we all know running backs get injured a lot, but now there's more to this whole thing than just injuries. So if you're going to be drafting someone like Dalvin Cook, you better get Alexander Mattison. If you're drafting Jonathan Taylor, you better get someone like a Marlon Mack. I really think that having those backups is going to be more important this year than it would have been in previous years.
Now, let me ask you this. So sticking with running backs, I guess we could talk about really any position, but do you think we're going to see a more diverse snap count amongst players, or do you think it's going to be less?
I think the big guys are still going to maintain. So your Christian McCaffrey, the Panthers don't have anyone on that roster that's going to cut into McCaffrey's snaps. You look at Saquon, the Giants. I mean, they have Dion Lewis that they signed. He's and Wayne Gallman. They don't have somebody that's going to really eat into the workload of Saquon Barkley. Tony Pollard, with as good that's why I said I think someone like a Tony Pollard has to be owned by the Zeke owner, because I think there's a chance, because of his success last year, that we see him a little bit more. In New Orleans, I don't really see a whole lot eating into Alvin Kamara's workload this year. In Cincinnati, I don't see Gio Bernard eating into the workload of Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is someone that I'm getting in every mock draft that I'm doing. If he's available in the second round, I'm getting him everywhere. I was just doing one earlier today. I decided to do a mock right after the news about Damian Williams because I wanted to see how late I'd be able to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire went the 4th pick in the second round, which is about a round higher than he has been going. So obviously the news traveled faster than I wanted it to, but I think the big guys are going to be able to maintain their snap percentages and their touch percentages, but the back half of the of those running backs, yeah. And again, it's all going to depend on situation, who's behind them. So right now, I don't think Todd Gurley is one of the top 15 running backs in fantasy football, but there's nobody behind him. They have Ito Smith, Brian Hill. I know Brian Hill gave you glimpses last year, but they're still saying Ito Smith is the second guy on the depth chart. I don't love Todd Gurley this year, but I love the volume he's going to get because I just don't see a whole lot behind him.
That's a fair assessment. I while I don't disagree with you in terms of some of the bigger players maybe not getting their snap counts cut into, I think in a situation somewhat like New England, obviously they switch in and out backs all the time between Rex Burkhead, Sony Michel, James White, whoever it might be. I think with that said, I think we see an even split in snap counts that way because I feel like if you can somewhat limit the amount of snaps each player plays to some sort of an extent, it also kind of tries to help prevent the spread of COVID.
Yeah. It's going to only because we don't know what the testing is going to look like when the actual season rolls around. The NFL said that they're going to be doing daily testing until less than 5% of players that test show up positive, and then it's going to be every other day. I think they're going to be able to do a good enough job within the league of limiting the spread. It's got to be on the players, and one of the reasons why I think the NBA and the NHL got it right was they're limiting the amount of access that these that these players have. That I know the term is the bubble, and a lot of people find it fun. But you know what? It's working. You look at both the NBA and the NHL over the last 2 weeks, 0 positive tests. That's what you get when you actually. And it's a lot more shocking with the NHL because you have 2 to 3 times the amount of players on an NHL roster that you have on an NBA roster. But to have 0 positive tests over a 2-week period is great news. And then you look at these other 2 leagues that are not keeping everybody in a one-town bubble, and the numbers are just going up. So, and we already know there's going to be travel. I wouldn't want to be on a plane having to go from New York to Los Angeles, which the Giants are going to have to do. They're going to have to play the Rams in week 3. I mean, who's going to want to do that? Who's going to want to travel cross country not knowing what everything's going to be like when you get there? So, yeah, there's just still so much we don't know that things can change in an instant.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that, if you think a bubble for the NFL would work. Obviously, you kind of brought it up. It's a little bit harder with the NHL because there are more players on an NHL roster than an NBA roster. I think it would be damn near impossible to do one for the NFL. But if they
Yeah.
could find a way to make it work, I think it would be awesome. I think it would satisfy, it would fix everything, not fix it, but it would make everything just so much easier for each, team.
Yeah, but there would have to be so much realigning that would have to go on because they only play once a week. And you can't have, as much as I'd love to see NFL games 2 or 3 or 4 a day, it's just not going to be feasible, because then what do you do when you have a team who played on a Thursday one week and then they have to come back and play Tuesday the next week? And then I just don't see that being a feasible option. I'd love it if it were able to happen. I just don't see it being an option.
No, I totally get that.
All right, so we're going to wrap up today's episode, continuing our top 5 segment. Today's top 5 is our top 5 favorite football movies. So, Jared, why don't you kick it off? What is your number 1 football movie?
So my number 1 favorite football movie of all time, it is arguably one of my all-time favorite movies in general, is The Blind Side.
Okay.
So the Blind Side is a story about Michael Orr, who he ended up getting drafted by the Baltimore Ravens. I forget what year, but the movie was so powerful. Every single person who played, their respective role nailed it. Quentin Aaron as Michael Orr was a phenomenal choice.
He was really good.
Sandra Bullock as Leanne Tui, absolutely incredible. And I actually learned that Sandra Bullock is actually friends with the Tuies now.
Yep.
Ever since the movie, she reached out and they became friends. I think, Tim McGraw did great. Lily Collins did great. I think the whole cast list just, they brought it together. And I actually, sorry to ramble a little bit, but I read an article the other night about Michael Orr's thoughts on the movie. And he wasn't in love with the movie like a lot of other people were, because I guess some of it wasn't as necessarily accurate. While I understand why it might be a problem for him, in every single movie that's based on a true story, it's really hard to get all those facts exactly correct. One of the bigger ones that I read that in the movie, Michael Orr is portrayed as a shy, quiet kid, not very trusting, and took him a long time to kind of open up. Whereas Michael Orr in real life, from my understanding, he's a very bubbly, fun person. He loves making new friends. So I guess that was one of the discrepancies that bothered him. But overall, I think the movie was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a good movie. My number 1, and for those of you who know me at all, know my love for Notre Dame football, Rudy. And it's one of those movies that if it's on TV, there's no chance in hell I'm not putting it on and watching till the end of the movie. It's one of 2 movies that will still make me tear up at the end every single time I watch it, no matter how many times I watch it. I can recite it word for word. And the one really cool thing is, after I had, I think the movie came out in 1993. My It must have been my 7th grade year when I was playing baseball. One of the coaches on my team went to Notre Dame, graduated with Rudy Rudiger, and went to their reunion, and he had a box of baseballs that he had Rudy sign for everyone on the team. So I actually have an autographed baseball by Rudy, and it's one of my most treasured pieces of memorabilia. The story is great. The acting in it is great. Yeah, Rudy will always be, in terms of football movies, my number one. I have listed it as number 3 overall for my movies. So
My number 2 for movies is Remember the Titans. Again, based on another true story. Rudy is, The Blind Side is. I think the way that Denzel Washington portrayed Herman Boone was absolutely incredible. I think all the actors did phenomenal. Wood Harris, Julius Campbell was he. I don't think there could have been a better pick for that role. The movie is just so touching. It's so heartfelt. And especially now, kind of given the state of our country and a lot of the things that we as people are going through, I think a lot of people should turn to a movie like this, and because it's so much bigger than football, right? It brings together, whites and black people that they in that time period didn't get along. That very segregated, and it brings together a whole different perspective. And so, Remember the Titans is always going to be up there for me.
Number 2 is, and I know it's not everyone considers it a football movie, but it has to be considered a football movie. For me, is Jerry Maguire. I mean, some of the more classic lines you'll ever find. You had me at hello, show me the money. I mean, who doesn't know those lines? Jerry and Cuba Gooding Jr. is just perfect as Rod Tidwell. Tom Cruise, I mean, he delivers the Tom Cruise performance. Renee Zellweger is amazing. Jerry Maguire is my number 2.
So my number 3 is Rudy. If it wasn't for Remember the Titans, it would be number 2. And I actually have a relatively funny story. So growing up, this is going to be very weird. Growing up, I loved college. I still love college football, but I loved college football so much as a kid in middle school that Notre Dame and the North Carolina Tar Heels were my 2 favorite teams. They were always my 2 favorite teams. And Rudy was my favorite movie as a kid. And I had this old Notre Dame hat that I used to wear every single day to school. And so I had this one teacher in my woodshop class in middle school, and every single time she saw me walking down the hall, she would chant, Rudy, Rudy, just because of how much I love that movie. I always talked about Notre Dame football. And you said it yourself. I mean, Sean Astin played a perfect Rudy Rudiger. I think that is arguably one of his best roles. I honestly forgot that Vince Vaughn was in that movie.
Jamie O'Hara.
Yeah. But no, that movie is an absolute classic. So that is my number 3.
There was actually a goof in the last the game that Rudy plays. The jersey that Vince Vaughn wears says O'Hare, even though the player's name, and he's always referred to as O'Hara, which is actually his name. The jersey said O'Hare, so there was a goof that they didn't pick up. But yeah, Vince Vaughn. I mean, he's so young in that movie. I love watching that, and so, oh my God, look how young Vince Vaughn looks. Number 3 for me, and this is not because I'm actually in the movie, is Draft Day. The faux NFL draft themed movie with Kevin Costner. So it was the 2013 NFL draft, they started film, and I went to every draft at Radio City from 2007 to 2014. During the 2013 draft, they were filming parts of the movie during the actual draft, so we had to sign releases saying that our likenesses may be used in the movie. And so when they're finally getting to the actual draft broadcast, they scan the crowd, and you can actually see me while they're scanning. So, but I just think it's a great movie. I think the plot is just something that really makes you think about, maybe is this really how it happens behind the scenes? And I know there's some executives that say, yeah, it doesn't work at all like that. And there's some that say, yeah, that's really close. But I just think that the idea behind it and the execution of it was really well done. So Draft Day is my number 3.
So my number 4 would have to be Gridiron Gang with Dwayne The Rock Johnson. The movie itself wasn't phenomenal, right? It was a good movie. It was entertaining. For what it was an exceptional movie. It was loosely based on a true story, but the reason that movie is always going to be one of my top 5 football movies is because I remember playing Pop Warner football, and I remember one day instead of practice when this movie first came out, the coaches of the team made everybody wear their football jerseys and pads, everything, down to the cleats. And we all went to the movie theater, sat in our pads and stuff, and watched the movie together. And I'll just never forget that moment. I'll never forget that time having to wear full pads to the movie theater with my whole team. And honestly, seeing that movie brought a lot of us closer together. A lot of, I guess, unlikely friendships were formed. People that in middle school and high school were the super popular kids that, someone like me who was the nerdy kid would never be friends with, because we went through this whole thing together. We all became closer. And that's, how and that's kind of the message that movie delivers as well. So I thought it was great, and I remember it was just a lot of fun. So that's why the Gridiron Gang is up there for me.
All right, number 4 for me is Varsity Blues. I happened to be in high school at the time that this high school movie was coming out, and it had everything from the humor, from the great. Obviously, some of these scenes are pretty iconic when you have the whip and you're seeing this. I mean, obviously, it's going to really stick out to you. But I thought the actual football in the movie was done pretty well, and the fact that it tells a story with that a lot of people really didn't see as a major storyline, but one of the big storylines in it was racism, and you have this all-world coach who has won state title after state title after state title, just didn't want his black running back to score the touchdowns because of his racism. And it really has a lot more touching parts in it than a lot of people would understand. So, just from a personal frame of mind, Varsity Blues is my number 4.
So my number 5 is Radio. While that movie itself, I wouldn't necessarily call it a football movie. It's still a football movie.
It is a football movie. Another great performance by Cuba Gooding.
Cuba Gooding Jr. did absolutely amazing. That is such a memorable performance by him. Ed Harris is Coach Jones. Um, he absolutely phenomenal. And the story, similar to Varsity Blues, it's a racially divided town,
Yeah.
and you know, uh, radio is kind of caught near the practice fields, and the players are giving him crap, and the coach, goes over and saves them, and feels bad for him, and kind of takes him under his wing, and then radio becomes the assistant to the coach on the team, and that movie will get me every single time. The story again is very touching. It's very moving. Also, I just realized I went 5 for 5 with movies that are based on a true story in some way or another. Not on purpose, just kind of how it worked out. But I think just overall, the acting, the storytelling, the way it was written, it was just very, very great. Um, the guy who played Radio actually passed away last year, or not the guy who it was inspired by. He passed away last year at age 72, which, while it obviously didn't hit me hard, it hit me a little bit harder than, more deaths of kind of random people you hear about, because that movie was a big part of my upbringing, and it was a big part of, just one of the movies that I've always loved. So.
And so my number 5 to round it out, and this one again is strictly for sense of humor, and that's Waterboy. I mean, the Waterboy is just one of the, again, if you want iconic lines, you can't shy away from the Waterboy.
Oh my god! What's great is that movie is absolute comedy gold, and
it's so good.
It will always get me. Water sucks. It really.
Gatorade. And then I mean. So, and Henry Winkler, I'm sorry, but any part that Henry Winkler does is amazing. He can be so awful, but it's still great. I mean, and for him to play the role of a football coach who used to be able to call good plays, but now his notebook got taken away and he can't do anything. I mean, and Farmer Fran, who you can't. I mean, Vicky Valancourt. I mean,
oh man, it's
Captain Insano. You have the Big Show making a cameo as Captain Insano. I mean, it's comedy gold. So Waterboy is going to be up there for me.
If I had to give honorable mention to one, it would be The Longest Yard with Adam Sandler.
I like Adam Sandler's version so much better than the original one with Burt Reynolds, even though Burt Reynolds is in the Sandler one, but he plays the Adam Sandler role in the original. I love the Adam Sandler version of The Longest Yard.
No, it was funny. I actually watched it the other day. I just, those movies will always get me. For whatever reason, his football, comedy movies are just absolute gold. I feel like Chris Rock was phenomenal in that movie. Terry Crews, Nelly, the R&B artist, he was in there. The cast list was
the cast list is amazing, and you look at some of the NFL, the football, the actual football players who made appearances in the movie, and you have the wrestlers that made appearances in that movie. Just the cast list is amazing.
Yeah, that movie is just too funny, and that movie's a little bit more vulgar than The Waterboy, so probably can't quote it on air.
No. So that is going to wrap it up for this week's Zero Technique Football Podcast. You can find Jared on Twitter at Twitter on Twitter at journalistj0. You find me on Twitter at rstern33. The show is on Twitter at ZeroTechPod. Again, thanks to backsportspage.com for producing the show. Make sure you're checking out backsportspage.com. All the amazing content. We got a couple new writers who are putting up some amazing content. Want to give them a shout out. Make sure that they know that they're doing a great job. We're all behind you. And follow Backsports Page on all social media outlets. Jared, looking forward to it. Next week maybe is probably going to be my last one for a couple weeks as we're getting ready for the arrival of my son. Will be no later than August 14th. So counting down the days.
All right, Ryan. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Be well.